Well, it's the first proper chilly morning we've had for a very long time. So middle of November, a frost. Actually just the weather you should have for keeving cider. So welcome to keeving cider, or cider making using the keeving method, part 2. So I'm just going to finish setting up, ready for milling the apples. What I'm doing here is just filling up a couple of barrels of water just for a wash, a pre-wash and a wash before they go into the mill. Just because what I try to do is to make sure that the bugs, bacteria and yeast that's left on the apples are the ones that are more predisposed to give a good fermentation, rather than be full of spoilage organisms. And I've found that the 2-stage wash has always been quite successful with my orchard, so I'm going to continue using that approach, even though I'm trying something different.
quick restorative and a recap. So what have we achieved today? I've pulped a load of cider apples, and in a slight change of plan I've also pulped a load of cooking stroke eating apples, and I've put the pulp in 2 different barrels. So I've got 2 barrels of pulp now, and it's going through, I think, what's called the couvage process now, i.e. it's just steeping as pulp in the barrels, which is a part of the keeving process I'm practicing. So I'm now totally committed to keeving everything this year, so we'll see how that goes. Look forward to it with interest. So the reason I've put the cooking and the cider apples in 2 different barrels is the different characteristics of the apples. The cider apples should lend themselves better with their nutrient levels and acidity to keeving, rather than the more nutrient dense cookers and eaters. So rather than mix them all up, I've decided, as I'm in for a penny, in for a pound, as they say, what I'm going to do is run 2 keeving experiments, the cookers and the cider apples, and see if there's a difference. Then I'll know in future years if I can combine them all or not. So yeah, that's it. So tomorrow I've got to get all of that pulp out of the barrels into the press, and then put the juice into the containers that I want to use for the keeving process. Thanks ever so much for watching the channel and for your comments. Really interested in any comments on cider making. Well, I'm interested in all your comments on anything, really. See you after me cup of tea tomorrow. Right, I can't remember if it's cider making day 2 or day 3. I think it's day 3. I've got to press the juice out of the apple pulp that's been going through its 24-hour couvage to put it into vessels ready for keeving. So that's what I'm going to do now, in amongst the rain. So I've just got to do a bit of cleaning up and sterilising of some stuff. So join me again when I've got the press set up, and I'll do the various things I need to do to start keeving the juice. So sometime later, I've cleaned everything that the cider is going to go into, fished out the press, cleaned these, I can't remember what they're called, got everything ready to go. It's going to take a bit longer than normal for pressing, because normally when I scrat the apples, I could do it by the bucket, and one bucket, if you like, makes a slice of cheese. Whereas because I put all the buckets in these barrels for the couvage yesterday, I've got to scoop it back from there onto the cheeses. So that's going to slow the process down, but hey ho, all in the name of experimentation and about. So let's see how it goes. I'll start to set up. So this will be experiment 1, if you like.
juice is starting to run. Interesting, there's a lot more juice at the bottom, so it's obviously started to run into the bottom of this container. Yeah, if I look at it, I can see bubbles on the surface. So it's obviously just gently started to ferment a bit last night, even though it was outside in the cold. So you can see it's draining without any weight on it at all, just the weight of the apples. But I'll accelerate it now with the press. The nature of the juice is very different as well. Normally when I'm making a normal dry cider, the juice will run much more clear, and I tend to clear it with a pectin enzyme, which helps me with very clear cider. Whereas with this process, you actually don't want, you've got to keep the pectin in there. To form the head, to form the gel. I always think the pressed apple looks like a really nice tartan. Time simply flies by. Right. I don't mean tartan, I mean tweed. Sort of like a tweed material. Make a nice suit out of it. The Dr. Phil cider tweed. What all the best people are wearing. Right, so that's one cheese completed. So you can see it's a satisfying but pretty labour intensive process. So I'll get it all ready for the next lot, and as you heard, maybe have a bite of lunch because I'm starving. See you on the other side. So I've got a pH here of 3.7. So what that means is I can look it up in my pH tables to see if I might just add a bit of a Camden tablet to help manage bacteria. But I'll do that in a bit. But we know we've got a pH of about 3.7. So I'll turn that off now. Right, it's time to regroup. Pressing's done. So I've got 2 vessels of apple juice with this added. What is it? Well, I've lost a lens in me spec, so it's not very easy to read. Pectin methyl esterase. So this is the thing that's meant to help the pectin coagulate and form the chapeau brun on the keeves during the keeving process. So I've got this from France. So we'll see how that goes. It's added. The next job is you should now work out when to add the calcium chloride. But I needed a dish of tea before I could get my head around that, and find a calculator, because there's some stuff to do with that as well. So I've measured the pH. Both vats are 3.7 pH. So that's about where you would expect. So I've just got to decide whether I'm going to work out how much and whether I'm going to put Camden tablets in. Andrew Lee suggests a much lower dose for the keeving process than for a normally naturally fermented cider. So I shall have a think about that. But the first thing I'm going to do is to see if the coagulation process for the chapeau brun is starting. So I'll fiddle about and take some samples and see. Yeah, this is proper involved. It's like saving the cider world. It's like a day in the lab at Rothamsted Research. So I've got to add calcium chloride to a sample of the cider. It says well, it says a litre, but I'm going to reduce the quantities in proportion. It says do it in a clean beaker. Well, this a clear beaker. Well, this is meant to be clear, but it's so old, this Pyrex thing, that it's not very clear. So I don't know that I can see much going on. So I'm going to put it into a beer glass, resisting the urge to drink it. And then to that 1/4 litre, it says I need to add 0.225 of a mil, because it'd be 0.9 mil for a litre. So 0.9 for a litre, that's a 1/4, so divided by 4. 0.225 of a mil. So I've got a little diddly doofer. And then when you add, you're meant to stir to see if anything starts to coagulate. And if it does, it's time to add. So it's a tiny amount. Try again, because it's mostly air. That's better. Right, 0.225 of a mil of calcium chloride. And what does it say? After take a litre of the juice in a clear beaker, add to the juice while stirring. Right, it's added, and I'm stirring. What do we see? For 2 minutes. Don't worry, I'll edit this. Well, never having done this before, I don't really know what I'm looking for. So every day is a school day here, but it doesn't seem to be much of a flocculation. The instruction says, as suitably vague, the flocculation may show a cloud of fine suspended particles, coloured grains like semolina, or translucent like tapioca. If this occurs immediately, it's time to add the CaCl2. If not, perform the test 3, 6 or 12 hours later. So what do I reckon? Let's take a sample out on the spoon. There are some bits, look. Do you reckon that's translucent like tapioca? Could be, couldn't it? I think I'll leave it though for another 3 hours. I think that's the end of this video. So sit rep is, I'm going to now leave it overnight, or at least another few hours before doing another chloride coagulation test. But that's really me for this evening now. But what I wanted to do was just name check this guy, Andrew Lee. He's my spiritual guide through the mystic world of cider. If you get Andrew's craft cider making book, you need no other book. Andrew, I'm no relation and I'm not sponsored, but Andrew used to work for a research institute, quite similar in some ways to Rothamsted. He used to work at Long Ashton Research Station, which shut a number of years ago now. And at Long Ashton they did a huge amount of the fundamental work to understand cider making scientifically. So the yeasts, the bacterias, the temperatures, the apple varieties, and all of those myriad interactions. And he's encapsulated a lifetime's work in this book. I know the guy actually who is one of the cider makers at Thatcher's, and he's had some of my cider and quite likes it. And he asked me what book I had, and I said, oh, this one. And Richard said, well, you don't need anything else. If you've got that, that's the best starter you can possibly get. So, and Andrew also has a cider making website, cider.org, I think, where it goes into even more detail than in this book. But if I've got any recommendation, if you want to get into cider making, you've got to get this. As Maximus Iron Thumper on one of my favourite channels says, it's a splendid book. So thank you very much for watching once again. I'm going to go and put my feet up, I think. See you next time when we'll see how this is flocculating. Good night.